All right, so today we're really going deep. We're going to be tackling Edmund Husserl, the father of phenomenology.
Oh, a great choice.
Yeah, and I know that Husserl can be, really, really dense, but that's kind of why we're here.
That's part of the fun.
Exactly. So we're going to try to unpack his ideas in a way that's both, precise, but also hopefully enjoyable, especially for a philosophy enthusiast like yourself listening.
Yeah.
We want to make this something that you can really dig into. And our guide through this dense forest of thought is going to be the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Husserl. Believe me, there's a lot to explore.
There is. It's a long one.
It is. It's a very, very meaty entry.
Yeah, and what I think is so fascinating about Husserl is that he wasn't just trying to build another philosophical system. He was really trying to change the way that we think about thinking itself. It's not just about what we know, but how we know it.
Right. So it's kind of like metacognition, like thinking about thinking.
Absolutely, yeah.
But before we get too deep into that, let's start with the man himself. Who's Edmund Husserl?
Okay, so Husserl was born in 1859, and he was initially drawn to mathematics.
Interesting.
Can you imagine a mind like that, first captivated by numbers?
It's amazing the minds of some of these philosophers and how they work.
I know. It's really something else. But he studied both mathematics and philosophy, deeply influenced by figures like Franz Brentano
Right.
and Carl Stumpf. But here's where things take a really interesting turn, I think. He attempted to ground mathematics in psychology
Okay.
to understand the logical basis of numbers, like through the lens of human experience.
Well, that sounds like a pretty ambitious project. Did it work?
Well, not quite. He
Yeah.
faced some pretty significant criticism, particularly from the logician Gottlob Frege.
Right.
But, this critique, however, actually proved to be a really pivotal moment, I think. It pushed Husserl away from his initial psychological approach and towards the development of what we now know as phenomenology.
Ah, so this intellectual sparring match,
Yeah.
kind of helped shape the course of his thinking.
Exactly, precisely. And this shift led him to focus on pure logic, like the underlying structures of meaning and knowledge. So he was really interested in how we, build systems of knowledge, how propositions, those statements that can be true or false, come together to form kind of a coherent understanding of the world.
Right. That's a pretty fundamental question, at the heart of a lot of philosophy. How did he approach that?
Well, Husserl believed that language was the key.
Oh.
So he meticulously analyzed sentences and more importantly, he looked at the intentional acts behind those sentences,
Okay.
like the acts of a speaker expressing meaning.
Okay, so now we're getting into the heart of it here. What exactly are these intentional acts?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Every time you think or experience something, your consciousness is directed towards something.
Okay.
When you think of, let's say, the concept of justice, your thought is about justice. It's an act of your mind kind of reaching out towards a concept.
Right.
That's intentionality.
So even if I'm thinking about something that doesn't actually exist, like a unicorn, my thought still has a direction, a target, even if that target is non-existent.
Exactly. Husserl argued that even objectless thoughts have content. There's a meaning there, even if there's no corresponding object in the real world. And this, I think, is, it's a challenge to that traditional view that knowledge is simply kind of a reflection of the external world. It suggests that the mind actually plays an active role in creating meaning.
Right. That's a pretty radical departure from how we normally think about knowledge. It's not just passive reception, but active creation.
Yeah, that's right. And it gets even more complex, I think, when we consider the idea of fulfillment. Husserl argues that any meaning that's logically consistent can be fulfilled by an intuition. So this intuition, this could be a perception, like seeing a tree, or it could be an act of imagination, like picturing a unicorn.
Okay.
So both of those would be considered intuitions.
Well, can you give me an example to help kind of illustrate this idea?
Yeah, sure. Imagine a square.
Okay, I'm imagining a square.
Okay, now imagine a square that is simultaneously fully red and fully green.
So like half and half, or like?
No, fully red and fully green at the same time.
Okay, I can't quite picture that.
It's really hard, right?
Mhm.
Because it's a logically inconsistent concept.
Right.
But when you imagine just a red square,
Right.
your mind can easily grasp that concept. It's a consistent meaning that can be fulfilled by an intuition. In this case, an act of imagination.
Right. So it's not just about the words or the concepts themselves, but about how our minds actually grasp and experience those concepts.
Exactly. Meaning isn't just kind of abstract logic. It's grounded in our lived experience, in the way that our consciousness engages with the world.
Yeah, this is already giving me a lot to chew on. But I know Husserl didn't stop there. He tackled some pretty thorny issues.
Oh, yeah.
Like the problem of indexicals. What are those, and why do they pose such a challenge?
Well, indexicals are words like I, here, and now. And they're fascinating. They're fascinating because their meaning is inherently context dependent. The I that I'm referring to is different from the I that you're referring to.
And
The here of this conversation is different from the here of wherever you happen to be listening.
Right. So how can these words have any fixed objective meaning if they're constantly changing depending on who's speaking and when?
Right. That was the puzzle that Husserl was grappling with. And his solution involved distinguishing between a word's general meaning function and its specific meaning in context. So he uses the term character to describe this general function. And it's similar to how character is used in formal logic. So the character of A remains constant,
Right.
but its respective meaning shifts depending on who's uttering it.
Right. That's a clever distinction.
Yeah.
But does it fully resolve the problem?
That's a matter of debate. I mean, some argue that even with this distinction, there's something more going on with indexicals, something that points to a deeper connection between thought, language, and the world itself. And this is where things start to get, I think, really interesting.
Okay.
Because it suggests that meaning isn't just contained kind of within our heads, but is somehow intertwined with the very fabric of reality.
That's definitely a concept worth exploring further. But for now, I think we need to take a pause.
Indeed, there is much more to unpack in the world of Husserl. Picking up where we left off, I think it's helpful to consider Husserl's ideas about singularity and horizons.
Okay.
These concepts are really central to understanding how he views experience and meaning making.
Right. Singularity and horizons. Let's unpack those. Singularity sounds straightforward enough.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just the idea that each experience is unique, referring to a specific, particular thing in the world?
Yeah, that's the essence of it. We're not just thinking about abstract concepts. We're encountering individual, concrete things. When you see a tree, you're not just seeing kind of treeness in general. You're seeing this particular tree with its specific shapes and size and location. This emphasis on singularity really reflects Husserl's focus on lived experience.
Yeah.
Right? It's about the concrete, the tangible, the here and now.
Okay, I'm with you on singularity.
Yeah.
But what about horizons?
Mm-hmm.
That one sounds a bit more mysterious.
Well, think of it like this. When you experience something, you're not just focusing on the immediate present moment. Your mind is also filled with kind of anticipations and expectations about what might come next, what lies beyond your immediate field of perception.
Okay.
And these anticipations form the horizon of your experience.
So it's like our minds are always reaching out beyond the present, projecting possibilities into the future.
Exactly. And these horizons aren't just temporal, they're also spatial. So when you look at a painting, you see a portion of it.
Right.
But you also have a sense of the whole,
Right.
a sense of what lies beyond the edges of the canvas.
Yeah.
That sense of the whole, those unseen aspects, are part of the horizon of your experience.
So if I'm following you correctly, horizons kind of give context and meaning to our singular experiences. They connect the present moment to kind of a wider field of possibilities.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this connection between horizons and meaning is really crucial for understanding how we make sense of the world.
Right.
It's not just about isolated experiences. It's about how those experiences fit into a larger interconnected web of meaning.
This is starting to sound a bit like the hermeneutic circle, the idea that understanding a part requires understanding the whole and vice versa.
Yeah, you're right to see that connection. I mean, Husserl was certainly influenced by hermeneutics, and the idea of the horizon definitely has some parallels with the hermeneutic circle.
Right.
But Husserl's focus is specifically on the structure of consciousness, on how these horizons are constituted within our own minds.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is all fascinating stuff, but I have to admit it's getting pretty abstract. Can you give me like a concrete example of how horizons work in everyday life?
Sure. Let's go back to that painting you mentioned.
Okay.
Imagine you're looking at a portrait and you're focusing on the subject's eyes.
Okay.
You see the details of the iris, the pupil, the way the light reflects off the surface.
Right.
But your experience isn't limited to those specific details,
Yeah.
right? You also have a sense of the face as a whole, the shape of the head, the expression on the face, even though those aspects aren't directly in your field of vision.
Right. So the horizon is what allows us to experience the part and the whole simultaneously, to
Well,
connect the details to a larger context.
exactly. And this applies not just to visual perception, but to all aspects of experience. Think about listening to a piece of music. You hear individual notes,
Right.
but you also experience the melody, the harmony, the overall structure of the piece.
Mm.
The horizon is what allows you to hold all of those elements together in your mind.
This is all starting to click into place. But now I'm wondering how this relates back to the problem of indexicals that we talked about earlier.
Oh, it's a great question. And the connection is subtle, but it's profound.
Okay.
Remember that indexicals, like here and now, are constantly shifting. They're meaning dependent on the context.
Mm-hmm.
But the horizon of our experience provides that context. The here of this conversation is only meaningful because it's embedded within a larger horizon of spatial and temporal understanding.
So the horizon is what anchors the shifting meaning of indexicals, giving them a kind of stable ground within our experience.
That's a brilliant insight. And it points to, I think, a key aspect of Husserl's philosophy. He's trying to show that meaning isn't just something objective and fixed kind of out there in the world. It's something we actively constitute through our experiences, and horizons play a crucial role in that process of constitution.
This is all incredibly rich and complex, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. But I know we need to move on to one of Husserl's most radical and challenging concept.
Yes.
The phenomenological epoche.
Yes, the epic. This is where things get really interesting and perhaps a bit unsettling.
Well, I'm all ears.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dive into this unsettling territory. What exactly is the epoche?
In essence, it's a method of bracketing our assumptions about the world, suspending our judgment about whether the things we experience actually exist.
Hold on, bracketing. You're saying we have to, like, doubt the existence of the world. Isn't that a bit extreme?
It might sound extreme, but Husserl has some compelling reasons for proposing this kind of radical move. Remember, his primary focus is on consciousness itself.
Right.
He wants to understand the structure of experience without getting bogged down by questions about the nature of reality.
But how can we even have experiences if we're, like, doubting the existence of the world? Doesn't that create a paradox?
It's a valid concern and one that has generated a lot of debate among philosophers. But think of it this way. When you dream, you have vivid experiences,
Right.
even though, upon waking, that the objects and events in your dream weren't real.
Right.
Right.
So you're saying that the epoche is like a waking dream state where we're aware of our experiences, but suspending judgment about their connection to reality.
That's a good analogy. The epoche isn't about denying the world's existence. It's about setting aside that question so we can focus on the pure phenomenon of experience itself.
Okay, I'm starting to see the logic behind this, even if it still feels a bit counterintuitive. But why is this bracketing so important for Husserl? What does it achieve?
Well, it allows us to analyze experience in its purest form, to see the underlying structures of consciousness without the distractions and assumptions we normally bring to our perceptions. It's like clearing away the clutter to reveal the foundational framework of our world making.
That's a powerful image. So by bracketing the world, we're essentially stripping away the layers of interpretation and assumption to get at the raw experience itself. But how do we actually do that? How do we perform this epoche? Sounds like a difficult kind of mental feat.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenging exercise, and there are different interpretations of how it's done. I mean, some see it as a kind of meditative practice, a deliberate act of disengaging from our habitual ways of thinking. Others see it as a more analytical process, a step-by-step examination of our assumptions and beliefs, progressively peeling back the layers of our worldview.
So it's not like there's one right way to perform the epoche.
Exactly. It's more about finding a method that works for you, a way to create the mental space needed for this kind of phenomenological investigation.
Okay. I'm starting to wrap my head around the epique, even if it still feels a bit mysterious. But I'm curious about what happens after we perform this bracketing. What do we do with these kind of bracketed experiences? What's the next step in Husserl's method?
That's where things get even more intricate and fascinating. But unfortunately, we're going to have to pause our deep dive here for now.
Don't worry, folks. We'll be back soon to delve deeper into the heart of Husserl's phenomenology. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Edmund Husserl. Before the break, we were uh, teetering on the edge of the phenomenological abyss, having bracketed the world with the epoche.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
now I'm ready to see what lies on the other side.
Well, the other side of the epique is where Husserl's project really takes shape. It's where we begin to analyze the structure of experience itself to understand how meaning is constituted within consciousness. And a key concept for this analysis is what Husserl calls the noema.
Okay, noema, I remember you briefly mentioned this earlier. Remind me, what is it exactly?
So the noema is the intentional object of consciousness, the what it is about of any given experience. It's the content, the meaning that's intended by our awareness, whether or not there's a corresponding object in the real world.
So if I'm looking at, say, sunflower, the noema would be my experience of sunflower encompassing all the qualities and meanings I associate with that concept.
Precisely. And remember, we've performed the epiche,
Right.
so we're not concerned with whether there's an actual sunflower out there.
Right.
We're focused solely on the noema, the sunflower as it appears within my consciousness.
This is where my brain starts to twist a bit.
Yeah.
So even if I were hallucinating a sunflower, there would still be a noema, a sunflower content, even though there's no real sunflower causing that experience.
That's exactly right. The noema is independent of the existence of the object itself. It's the intentional correlate of my active consciousness, the internal meaning structure that shapes my experience.
All right, I'm starting to grasp the concept of noema, but what about the raw sensory data? The actual colors and shapes and textures that make up my experience of the sunflower, where does that fit in?
Right, that's where Husserl comes in. Husserl uses this term to refer to the sensory material of experience, the raw data that is shaped and structured by our intentionality. Think of it like the clay a sculptor uses or the paint on an artist's palette.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the Heil would be the yellow petals, the brown center, the rough texture of the stem, all those sensory details that make up my experience of the sunflower.
Precisely. But the Husserl itself is formless and meaningless until it's shaped by the noema. It's the noema, the sunflower content, that organizes these sensations into a meaningful object.
So to use your earlier analogy, the Heil is the clay, and the noema is the sculptor's idea, the form that gives shape and meaning to the raw material.
That's a great way to visualize it. The noema is the intentional structure that transforms raw sensory data into a coherent experience. And this process of transformation, of shaping Husserl into a noema, is what Husserl calls constitution.
Constitution. Okay, this is where I feel like we're really getting into the heart of Husserl's project. It's not just about passively receiving information from the world, but actively shaping it, giving it meaning.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Husserl is challenging that traditional view of the mind as a kind of mirror reflecting reality. Instead, he sees consciousness as a dynamic force, actively creating our world of experience.
This raises a question for me. Is all constitution conscious and deliberate? Or is there a level of constitution that happens automatically without us even realizing it?
That's a perceptive question, and it gets to the distinction Husserl makes between passive and active constitution. So passive constitution refers to the preconscious processes that structure our experience without any deliberate effort on our part. It's like how our minds effortlessly group similar objects together, or how we instantly recognize a familiar face.
Right, those kinds of perceptual and cognitive processes that just happen in the background without us having to think about them.
Exactly. But then there's active constitution, which involves our conscious will and judgment. This is where we direct our attention, make choices, and impose interpretations on our experiences. It's the level of conscious meaning making, where we actively engage with the world.
So to bring it back to our sunflower example, passive constitution might be what allows me to see it as a distinct object against a background, while active constitution might involve my judgment that it's beautiful or my decision to paint it.
That's a great illustration. Both passive and active constitution are constantly at work, shaping our experience of the world. And this interplay between the two is what gives our experiences their richness and depth.
This is making me think about how we experience other people. Does does Husserl address this question of intersubjectivity? How do we come to understand other minds as distinct from our own?
Yeah, intersubjectivity is a central theme in Husserl's later work. He recognized that our experience of the world is not purely individual, but profoundly shaped by our interactions with others. And he argues that empathy plays a crucial role in how we understand other minds.
Empathy in the sense of kind of putting ourselves in another person's shoes, imagining what it's like to see the world from their perspective.
Precisely. But Husserl goes further than that. He argues that empathy is not just a psychological process, but a fundamental structure of consciousness. It's built into the very fabric of how we experience the world.
Okay, but how does empathy work on this deeper phenomenological level?
Well, Husserl argues that empathy is grounded in what he calls the life world, the pre-reflective, taken for granted background of shared meanings and practices that make our experiences possible. It's the common ground that allows us to communicate, understand each other, and navigate the world together.
So the life world is like the invisible web of shared assumptions and understandings that connects us all.
That's it. That's a good analogy. It's the pre-scientific, pre-theoretical foundation of our experience, the bedrock upon which all our knowledge and understanding are built. And Husserl argues that science itself is ultimately grounded in the life world, not the other way around.
So he's challenging the idea that science provides the most fundamental or objective view of reality.
Exactly. He's arguing that science is a product of human consciousness, a particular way of interpreting and understanding the world that emerges from our lived experience.
This leads us to one of Husserl's most challenging ideas, transcendental idealism. Can you try to unpack that for us?
Transcendental idealism is a complex and often misunderstood concept. It's the idea that objects exist, but their knowability, their meaning for us, depends on the structure of human consciousness.
So he's not saying that the world is an illusion or that everything is just a projection of our
Not
minds.
at all. Husserl affirms the reality of the world, but he's saying that our access to that reality, the way we experience and understand it, is always mediated by our consciousness.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a glimpse of what he's driving at, but how does he arrive at this position of transcendental idealism?
Well, it's a culmination of all the ideas we've been discussing. His analysis of intentionality shows that consciousness is always directed towards an object, even if that object doesn't physically exist. The Epicé allows us to examine the structure of experience without making assumptions about the world. And his exploration of intersubjectivity reveals how our understanding of the world is shaped by our interactions with others.
So all these threads come together to suggest that our knowledge of the world is inextricably intertwined with the structure of our consciousness.
Yep.
It's not a passive reflection of reality, but an active construction shaped by our minds and our interactions with others.
That's a great summation. Husserl's transcendental idealism is a profound challenge to traditional views of knowledge and reality. It forces us to reconsider the relationship between mind and world and to recognize the active role consciousness plays in shaping our understanding of everything around us.
Well, there you have it. A whirlwind tour through the intricate and fascinating world of Edmund Husserl. We've covered a lot of ground. From intentionality and the epichy to noema and Heil, from intersubjectivity to transcendental idealism, it's been a truly mind-bending journey.
It has been. And what's most remarkable about Husserl's work is its enduring relevance. His insights into consciousness, experience, and the nature of reality continue to resonate with philosophers, psychologists, and really anyone interested in understanding the human condition.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. If, as Husserl suggests, our understanding of the world is so deeply intertwined with the structure of our consciousness, what are the implications for how we live our lives? How do we navigate a world that is, in a sense, co-created by our minds?
That's the question each of us must grapple with. Husserl's work doesn't provide easy answers, but it gives us a powerful new framework for understanding ourselves and the world we inhabit.
And on that thought-provoking note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the mind of Edmund Husserl. We hope you enjoyed exploring these complex ideas with us. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.